Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Tuesday, May 28th. Today is day 235. I'm back in the United States. I'm now in Washington, D.C., and I just arrived from the Middle East this morning, and I wish I had good news. The updates from today is just full of more tragedy, more horror, more devastation. Just devastating news. Reports about an attack on Rafah by the Israeli military in the last 24 to 48 hours are just harrowing. I think it was the Washington Post, one of the articles title is, "I saw with my own eyes someone burning. Eyewitnesses describe the Israeli strike on a Rafah tent camp, where at least 45 people were killed and dozens more were wounded late Sunday." So this happened Sunday night. I've been flying since Monday, but I'm not sure if I shared this in an update. More information, of course, about the attack has come out. More than half of the victims are women and children, and there are horrific videos and pictures online. Netanyahu had called this a tragic incident. I did share that in yesterday's update. And Churches for Middle East Peace joined with aid groups in calling for the International Criminal Court's ruling on Rafah to be applied and to be honored. We, with other NGOs, signed a statement that said, "We urgently call on all permanent and elected members of the UN Security Council to enforce the International Court of Justice's orders regarding Israel's actions in Rafah. Immediate action is required to uphold international law and ensure that the government of Israel meets its obligations as mandated by the ICJ. The ICJ has determined that Israel's military operations in Rafah have created a catastrophic humanitarian situation in line with the repeated predictions and warnings of the humanitarian community in the build-up to the offensive. The court ordered an immediate halt to all military operations in Rafah, the opening of the Rafah border crossing for unhindered humanitarian relief, and access for UN fact-finding bodies to investigate potential violations of the genocide conventions." So Churches for Middle East Peace signed alongside a number of NGOs, including ActionAid, ANERA, CARE International, Dan Church Aid, Norwegian Refugee Council, Oxfam, and some of our board groups. The American Friends Services Committee, the Mennonite Central Committee, the U.S. division of MCC sits on our board. And then Doctors Without Borders, they signed that statement as well, and they put out a statement calling for an end to the war in Gaza, which we have been doing as well since October 7th. But I wanted to just share some of the things they put in their statement, because I think we just have to not give up hope, continue to cry out, continue to call on our elected officials, continue to pray, but also engage in prayer vigils. Gaza Ceasefire pilgrimages just launched our second phase. I got a note. I think that the Canadians already took their mass action to Ottawa. I haven't read the emails yet. I'm a bit behind with travel. But Doctors Without Borders calls for an end to the war in Gaza, and they talked about the way the forces struck the refugee camps in Rafah, killing dozens and injuring hundreds, intensified the offensive in Rafah, which also has caused a reduction of the provision of access to healthcare, and facilities have been forced to stop operating, which was already catastrophic. And Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, calls for an immediate end to the offensive in Rafah, an immediate and sustained ceasefire in Gaza. And they talked about the UN Security Council meeting today after Israel struck the tent camps. Those displaced people were in designated humanitarian zones. I think that's really, really important to understand. This wasn't, all the attacks have been horrific, but these were people that were in humanitarian zones. And so I wanted to call that to your attention. Israel's military strategy of repeatedly launching attacks in densely populated areas inevitably leads to the mass killing of civilians. Civilians are being massacred. They are being pushed into areas where they are told that they will be safe, only to be subjected to relentless airstrikes and heavy fighting. That's what the Secretary General Chris Lockyer of Doctors Without Borders said. Entire families made up of dozens of people are crowded into tents, living in extremely difficult conditions. Over 900,000 people were forcibly displaced again as Israeli forces intensified their offensive on Rafah in early May. Today, 21 Palestinians were killed and 64 injured, according to local authorities, after Israeli forces bombed another tent camp for displaced people in Mawasi, which is west of Rafah in southern Gaza. And that is all according to Médecins Sans Frontières. In Gaza, overnight into Monday, the IDF struck senior Hamas members in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, which ignited a blaze in a tent camp for displaced people that killed 45 civilians. So that was the incident that we were just talking about. And the world has been reacting to that. So, the Israeli advocate general said the incident was very severe. It will be investigated. She noted that the IDF's investigating 70 cases of suspected humanitarian law violations. I talked about that yesterday. Netanyahu called this a tragic error. I think the issue is we've been saying for weeks and for months, enough is enough. The Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said immediate international intervention is needed to stop the crimes and massacre in Rafah. The White House said that Israel must take every precaution possible to protect civilians. The White House has just got to stop talking and start doing something. The French President Macron said that he's outraged, and Italy's defense minister said Palestinian people are being squeezed without regard for the rights of innocent men, women, and children who have nothing to do with Hamas. This can no longer be justified. I would say to the defense minister of Italy, this was never justified. Egypt's foreign minister condemned Israel's force and deliberate bombing of displaced people in a new and blatant violation of the provisions of international law, and Qatar called the strike a grave violation of international law. An Egyptian soldier was killed. This is a big deal. This happened while I was on the plane, and my husband told me when he picked me up this morning. An Egyptian soldier at the Rafah border was killed, and others were wounded because there was an exchange between Egyptian forces and Israeli forces at the Rafah border in the last 24 hours. The IDF has not determined from their perspective who opened fire first. Soldiers claimed it was Egypt, but the incident's being investigated. The death toll, according to the health ministry in Gaza, is at least 36,050 Palestinians, and those wounded is 81,026 since October 7th. Hamas has said that it will not participate in talks for a hostage deal as a result of the massacre in Rafah. And Qatar has said that Israel's strike will hinder mediation efforts. And Yahi Yahud, the father of the siblings Arbel and Dolev Yahud, who are held hostage by Hamas in Gaza, said that the government gave up on the hostages and they're behaving like a guerrilla organization, adding that the hostages' families can only count on you, the public, to take to the streets en masse, to go out and shout for the cry and cry out on behalf of the hostages. He's, of course, speaking to the Israeli public. And I gave a little bit of an update yesterday about some of the time we spent at Hostage Square with some of the representatives who said, we're setting aside politics. We just want the hostages to be returned home. And many of the people who are advocating at the square are doing that during the day, and then at night are going out to call for a ceasefire and call for an end to war. The war cabinet minister in Israel said that they would reach the finish line in fighting in Rafah and move forward with a hostage deal as an obligation and a strategic necessity of the state of Israel, but that in his opinion, the fight against Hamas would continue for years. The overall goal of its destruction had not been achieved and would take more time. Two high-profile right-wing pundits posted photos on X comparing the fatal blaze in Rafah to the bonfires that were lit. I was in town for this festival. This is a Jewish festival called Lag Bomer, which is celebrated on Sunday night, and they said happy holidays while posting the pictures of Rafah burning. So we did talk already about the ICJ ruling and whether or not they said that the risk violating international law was binding and must be respected. That's according to the German foreign minister. EU countries are discussing how to take action to implement the ruling on Rafah. This is really significant because we need the world to put pressure on the United States and to put pressure on Israel to apply international law. So it's a big deal that the EU's foreign policy chief Borrell said, from now on, I will never say Israel. I will never say the Netanyahu government, because it's this government who's making the decisions that could kill the Palestinian Authority. So we need Europe and other international powers to put pressure on the Israeli government and the US government to say the bombing of Gaza must stop, that this war must be brought to an immediate end. Hostages have to be returned home. Prisoners held unjustly in Palestinian prisons need to be released. All these things we've been asking for months. There have continued to be escalations with, or hostilities at least, with Hezbollah between North Israel and South, the southern part of Lebanon, where Hezbollah has been operating. The IDF said there were 20 to 30 rockets fired again at the Meron area. That's where that fire has been. They said, at least according to today's reports, they still were struggling to control the blaze that was caused by the rocket fire. But there were not casualties today. A drone struck a vehicle in southern Lebanon. An Israeli drone, and in the West Bank, 6 Palestinians were arrested because they were suspected to have been involved in acts of terrorism overnight into Monday, according to the IDF, adding that 2 of the suspects were affiliated with Hamas. I did hear while I was on the ground that Hamas was rampant in the West Bank and was actually more active in the West Bank than in the previous 8 months. So that was something that I did hear when I was on the ground. Other significant news is that the U.S. Pier is completely out of operation, which is like so ridiculous. It's going to take a week for them to repair. It was damaged by rough seas. So Army engineers are working to put the pier back together again. It feels like Humpty Dumpty and about as dumb as that too. So we will not give up hope. We will continue to work for peace. Please pray, pray, pray for all those people in Rafah. And don't give up on your efforts. Don't give up hope. Continue to work toward peace.